This lecture is a very short lecture, and it's talking about the annotated bibliography. The annotated bibliography is where you have your citation for your source, and then you have a couple of paragraphs, one or two paragraphs, describing the source and making comments about the source. You arrange it alphabetically, just like the Works Cited page. However, you just have the paragraphs after each citation. It's a list where each citation is followed by that short descriptive and sometimes evaluative paragraph or annotation. Annotation means a short piece of writing. There are four types of annotated bibliographies. There's the indicative bibliography, the informative bibliography, the evaluative bibliography, and then the combination of types, kind of like a hybrid bibliography. The indicative bibliography asks to indicate what the source contains or simply identify the topic of the source, but it does not evaluate or discuss the argument or the evidence. It just merely lists the ideas that are present in the source. And so the indicative biography, you would just say, you went to this source and this is what the source contained. The informative bibliography. This form of bibliography is where you summarize each source and then you briefly state the work's thesis, the primary assertions, and the evidence that supports the main argument, and then any conclusions that the author makes. It's just informing the audience about what the source is about and what is contained in the source and what was the conclusion of the author who wrote the source or compiled the source. The evaluative bibliography. This is where you're asked to evaluate the sources you find. It includes a brief summary of the argument and conclusions, and then you move on to critically evaluate it. So you would have two paragraphs. One paragraph talks about what the source is about, and then the second paragraph is evaluating it. Was a good source or a bad source? So questions you might ask would be, how useful is the source to your particular project? What are the limitations of the study or the argument? What are the strengths? How reliable are the conclusions? How effective are the research methods? Be sure to be clear about your evaluation criteria. So you need to know your evaluation criteria, but you need to be clear about it. Was it a good source or was it a bad source in terms of strengths and weaknesses? And then you supply examples as to why it was either strong or weak. Combination of types. This is a hybrid bibliography. Many annotated bibliographies have multiple purposes, so you'll be combining the forms. Most bibliographies, I would say, are a hybrid. So it's about 150 words for the hybrid, and again, it's one or two paragraphs. So the first paragraph would be talking about what is the source about, what was included in the source. Second paragraph would be evaluating it. Why do you write an annotated bibliography? Well, you write one so it helps you compile the list of your sources. It helps you decide and identify if you want to return to those sources later in your process. It can help you develop your thesis. If you're unsure what you really want to write about, what your argument is, well, take a look at the sources you used and what those sources contained. It'll help you write a literature review, and this is something that you're not doing in this course, but you might be asked to do it in your next Gen Ed course, World Literature. And it will help you write a stronger, well-researched paper. What it does is it makes you look at your sources and say, hey, this source is better than this source, so why don't I just get rid of the weaker source? The length of the bibliography. Well, that depends on your instructor. Always ask for details about what the length is. So for this assignment, your length is 150 words per source in full sentences and paragraph structure. So basically, I would recommend that you have your citation, and it's in the format that you use in your Works Cited page, and then you have two paragraphs. One paragraph, what is the source about? Second paragraph, evaluating it. Content. How is it formatted? You begin with the proper citation of the source. You organize them in alphabetical order, and after each source you compose a paragraph or two that addresses your purpose for the bibliography. For this assignment, you're going to evaluate the source by adding comments that summarize your critique. In other words, what you're going to do is you're going to evaluate the source and say strong or weak, and then you're going to explain why. These do not need to be necessarily sources that are included in or were included in Essay 1 or Essay 2. However, it will allow you to look at and identify strong sources. Homework. It's assigned under the Annotated Bibliography folder, and it's worth 100 points. See D2L for updates and for the due date. There is no peer review for this. However, I strongly encourage that you do share your annotated bibliographies with your peers and get some feedback.